Hi everyone, welcome. I'm down here in my wormery and I wanted to check in on these bags that I've got down here. These huge bags, which are really just leaf collection bags that I received from the township. I'm using these to sort of quarantine the contents. If you've been here before, you'll know that I actually have three of these. So the third one is up on my bench. I brought this one up to the bench because this is the first one that we inspected a couple weeks ago. We finally delved into what's in these things 30 days after bringing them in. So 30 days after having it in here, 14 days ago we checked in on it, and then 7 days ago we checked in on the other two bags. But since this was the first one that we checked in on, I figured I would start here. I've been thinking that it might be nice to try to separate the worms from the castings that are in there and kind of get them working on a fresh environment. Recently I emptied a whole bunch of trays and I've got an empty, ready to go worm bin over there in the corner. Fresh bedding, even some food placed into it. So my idea was to maybe separate these little guys from all this finished castings material that they're inhabiting right now. Try to size up how many worms I'll get out of a bag like this. And then I'll know what to expect from the other two. But eventually I'd like to get all the worms kind of busy and working on things other than just that bunch of finished compost that they live in now. So let's get to work. Anytime we've ever gone into my compost barrel outside in the yard, which is where this material came from, we always find many things in there other than just worms. All kinds of insects in there helping with the breakdown process. And I guess that was one of the main reasons I was concerned about bringing this stuff in, knowing that, besides worms, there's other stuff living in this material. Some of the stuff are flying insects and whatnot, things I just don't want to have in the house. So when we came in here last time, the material had been bought inside because of fear for having it all freeze up. See a worm hanging out here near the top. So we bought it down here to protect it from the cold, and it's not really very well protected from drying either. Just a single bag inside of a paper bag does not really prevent evaporation too much. Maybe a little bit, but I definitely found that the material became nice and crumbly and easily broken up from its little chunks. If I find a little chunk like this, if I start to break away at it, I find that it does all break apart quite readily. Nothing like it was when we first pulled it out of the compost barrel. When we first pulled it out of the compost barrel, the stuff was like mud, you would hear it squishing in your hands, and there was absolutely no way of even seeing what was in this stuff. But now it's really becoming very, very manageable, it seems, or maybe it's just here on the surface. I don't know. I do feel like our, kind of exploring the material last time a couple weeks ago, and at that same time also taking that extra time to try to break this stuff up a little bit probably helped with aeration and further drying a little bit. I didn't know what this was going to be like. I knew that this stuff was chock full of all kinds of large materials, which I usually don't deal with when I want to sort of do a light separation, but that really is what I was thinking of here, was just to skim off the material on the top surface after we've given the worms a moment or two to dive down, and then repeat. After the worms that have dived down suddenly start to become visible again, then it's time to let this stuff sit a little bit longer once again, let the worms dive down again, and then come back for another skim off the top. So definitely a time-consuming process, probably one of the reasons I was avoiding doing it. And I guess along the way I could also maybe, try to help break the material up a little bit here and there as I, hit large clumps, break the stuff up. But I'm going to go get my sifter out, and I don't know. I really don't know what to expect, but I figure what the heck, let's just give it a try and start at it and see what happens. I don't expect to video this because I do expect that it'll take a long time. So I thought maybe switching to time-lapse mode would be one way to kind of capture the action, but in such a way that we could just sort of play it back and see it transpire pretty quickly. And then we'll sort of regroup in regular video mode after it's been done and see what we ended up with. Sound like a plan? Let's do it. Well, you know, on second thought, I'm not going to be fiddling around with the time-lapse stuff. I did try to set it up. I did try to initiate the capture of some time-lapse footage after I started into this, and then it just seemed like the camera stopped working for whatever reason, and I had to fiddle around with it just to get back to video mode and everything else. So I'm not even sure how good the results would have been, but I already went through kind of filling up the screen one time, shaking it loose, emptying the contents that had collected here in the screen. I haven't emptied the nice finished castings collecting down on the bottom. I guess I'll let that pile up until this whole setup becomes a little bit too heavy to shake around and jiggle. And as I keep working through the material, I try to pick out the worms that I've brought along for the ride. I guess I'm just being a little bit impatient in terms of waiting for this material to be cleared of worms, you know, rather than waiting for them to dive down. I've just been actually, you know, scooping some and then picking worms out. I don't know, either way you're going to just end up, you know, dealing with a fairly time-consuming process. And I could certainly see all this stuff that's collecting here in this screen. I could see this stuff being left to dry a little while and then being able to kind of get crumbled up a little further into even more nice fine castings, which will easily pass through the screen. So, you know, rather than forcing it or working it hard with a bunch of crumbling, I thought maybe just separate it quickly in the beginning and then somehow set it out to dry for a while, and then just handling it the next time would probably result in the stuff crumbling pretty much on its own. It's pretty heavily worked stuff, but, you know, it's also full of a bunch of things that would just take forever to get broken down. So it definitely seems to make good sense to separate, you know, 98% of the material, which is pretty much finished castings, from the stuff that still needs more time. And then at the same time try to get the worms out and get them started on a more productive job than working through this stuff and you know, not really having a lot to choose from either, you know. A lot of this is just broken down material at this point. Nothing more than castings combined with certain stuff that they probably can't make a whole lot of use of, like all these peanut shells everywhere. So I'll just continue with this and we'll see where it leads. One thing I can say for sure, it's slow going. It's probably one of the reasons I shy away from light harvesting so much. Not that it's such a big deal, it's just, you know, slow. Gotta kind of break up the material, triggering the diving action of the worms, trying to retreat down into the material. And then theoretically you should be able to grab a handful of stuff that's basically worm free at that point. What I've been finding is that if I, in this material here that I'm collecting in the screen, if I leave some of the large chunk materials that are in here already, then the really fine stuff will pretty readily just slip right between those large chunks. And then if there are worms in there, I can spot them pretty quickly and then drop them. What I've been doing is just chucking all the worms right in over here, since I'm kind of working out here, and this right underneath the screen is a section that I could easily avoid and just not bother with. All the worms that I'm collecting I keep dropping in here, so this edge of the bin is going to be loaded with worms at the end. And man, this stuff is just so nice. Just from me handling it a little bit, this stuff just turns into like powder almost. And it's incredible considering how gooey this stuff was when I pulled it out of the compost barrel. It's just so fine and so crumbly. And it's completely damp and cool and moist and everything like that, so there's no drying occurring here. Evidently just enough drying over the past 44 days with that one little stir up that we did a couple weeks ago. And it's produced some really fine castings. I could see if I had like a trommel or something that would spin this stuff and then cause these large chunks to drop and break and, you know, kind of break apart all on its own. This would be a pretty quick process, I'm sure. Just run it through a machine like that, and then in the end you'd have a bunch of separated stuff. So doing it this way is certainly the old-fashioned way and very time-consuming way. So here and there, maybe I'll just pop in and give you guys a peek as to how it's coming along. If I come up with any other little tricks that simplify the process, then I'll share. Yeah, pull out these little stems. Every time I spot one of these things, I think I'm seeing a worm. Yeah, there's one thing about this stuff that kind of surprises me, and you know what it is? It's how good I am at keeping it clear of any sort of stuff that would not break down. Because as I've been going through this stuff, you know, I'm very hands-on with all of it, either breaking it apart or throwing it into here, sifting it through, looking for worms. I've, as you can imagine, been pulling out chunks of stuff that are really have no business in compost, stuff that never should have been put into the compost bin, stuff like labels on a piece of fruit, or maybe a little chunk of weed barrier cloth that, you know, somehow got into the recycling container. But so far I've only found a couple little shreds of plastic, one label, a little bit of this weed barrier, here's another label, here's just some sort of chunk of plastic bag or whatever. There's something else over here, piece of foil. But you know what? Considering how much stuff I've already sifted through, I'm really surprised to have found so little of this stuff. I mean, if you watch the video of when I was actually going through this material originally after pulling it out of the compost barrel, you'll know that I already did do one screening of this stuff as I was handling it at that point, attempting pretty much to go through all of it and pick out anything of that nature as I found it. But I kept thinking that I'm probably going to have, you know, large hunks of stuff like this that I was handling that might have things like that stuck in the middle of it. So I wasn't able to go through all of this stuff. If I had a handful of material, then chances are I imagine that it would just be pretty much clear of the sort of stuff that I was looking for at that point, which was large things. So, you know, once in a while, perhaps in the middle of a clump of stuff that's yet to be broken apart, I'll find another label or something, but not a lot. Pretty cool. There's something that I've definitely been keeping my eye out for. This is the larva of a black soldier fly, and I've really got nothing against them. When they're in my compost barrel outside, I want them there because they do such a great job. I'm sure that a huge amount of this casting material is not just worm castings, but also insect frass, or, you know, the poop of insects, mainly these critters. Because before they turn into a fly, they eat like crazy, and I would definitely expect to see more in here. I'm actually kind of surprised to have only found this one so far with all this digging I've been doing. I mean, my bucket's even getting so heavy that I'm thinking of spilling out some of its contents to make it easier to handle when I'm jostling my material around to screen it. But I'm definitely keeping these guys separate. You know, I think they're designed to hunker down and survive cold temperatures and sort of reactivate when things get warm. And I was just worried about, that's the reason they're in the bags, you know. I was worried about little guys like this coming to life and then flying insects all over my basement. No thank you. Let's put this little guy aside. Oh yeah, did I mention that I created an information board for this one? I dropped it, so it's got these little marks on it that are the result of it falling on the ground. But most of this is stuff I believe I mentioned already. It was just the age. Or, well, I mean, not the age, because this stuff goes back to 2009, I believe, was when I set this compost barrel up originally. And even then, I was using a lot of material that was already in progress from the previous incarnation of my compost barrel. And then it continued in here, and then, you know, for a couple years, it's just been accumulating. So, 44 days since we emptied the compost barrel, and bought all of this stuff that I assume to be pretty close to, if not completely finished material, obviously commingled with a bunch of stuff that's still in progress. So it's actually kind of coming along almost exactly as I had anticipated. I was hoping that it would get to this point where it's very easy to go through this stuff, and then as it crumbles into, obviously finished castings and the other stuff becomes really clear to identify as well. Avocado shell, lots of peanut shells, pistachio shells. This is interesting. Just a couple worms huddled up inside of this peanut shell. Maybe they're mating. They look awfully entwined with one another. So I'm getting there, I'm accumulating a good amount of material in the bucket once it passes through the sifter. And I know a lot of the stuff that still gets caught in the screen still has a lot of castings just stuck to it because of the remaining dampness. I got a feeling if we were to let that stuff sit for a few days, dry just a little bit more, maybe crumble it a little bit between two hands, a great amount of it would come clean of any castings still stuck to it. Then we'd have a bunch of material that could just go pretty much right back out into the outdoor compost barrel to continue. Or maybe just have a little bonfire, burn the stuff. If it's going to take years to break down, maybe I don't even want it in my compost barrels. Peanut shells specifically. I kind of like that idea. I like that idea of taking all this stuff that hasn't broken down and burning it. I don't have to go too nuts with this, It's just sort of a rough breakdown of stuff that's really obviously beautiful finished castings. That's the stuff that's going through the screen and accumulating down in the bucket. And then there will be, a whole bunch of stuff that maybe will burn it. But the third and most important piece of it is the worms that I eventually drive down as a result of us doing all the rest of this stuff down to the very bottom, where hopefully at the end we'll just have a huddled together bunch of worms that we can scoop out of here and take a closer look at how many we collected. So for a while now I've been kind of going right down the middle here, and I chipped away everything that I could as far as like the really clumped together stuff at the bottom. So anything that's in further now would be probably, if I were to grab a chunk of it, there'd be still blocks like this, but everything to this side has been broken free of being together like that. There's things in here like, I don't even know what this is, part of a, more of the same, peanut shells everywhere. But there's also like the little pits out of, no, that might be a sunflower seed. Yeah, that's what that was. There's all kinds of little stuff in here, and I'm still able to break a lot of it up further. Some of it is still pretty tough. Doesn't break apart quite as readily. Makes me wonder if it's just, further dampness that if it were to dry a little bit, then it would all just flake away really easily. I don't know. I think once I screen this last batch here that I've also at the same time been removing worms from, I could probably go through this pretty quickly, because I'll catch a worm here and there like this little guy. But a large number of the worms out of this stuff have already been pulled out and moved over. So now I think we're just getting to the point where the red bucket underneath the screen here, I don't know if you could see into there, but it is getting pretty full. I would have to say it's probably approaching halfway full. And castings, they're pretty heavy, so I like the idea of maybe offloading what we've collected so far as far as screened castings and putting them someplace. Lighten the load here a little bit so I can continue. At some point, I was really thinking that I'd like to get these, or a large number of them at least, I'd like to get these little guys back out into the compost barrel once the threat of freezing is over. Because that's really where they belong. I just thought that as long as they're in here in the warm conditions, why not take advantage of the harvesting of their material and put them to work on some other stuff. So we're getting there, nice and slow and steady, and it's relaxing, I gotta say. It's pretty time consuming, but Also quite relaxing at the same time, so I can't complain. Well, as you can see, I'm definitely approaching capacity on this bucket here, and the stuff is beautiful. There's worms in there. They snuck through the screen. There's all kinds of little things that snuck through the screen, that's for sure. Stuff is so nice and damp. Beautiful castings. Here and there's going to be a few little worms that fell through the screen. Perhaps even a few larger ones snuck through. Stuff like this, the seed of something. So whatever, it's certainly nice, but it's getting heavy. It's getting a little bit hard to be able to have this with this on top of it and shake it all around, so I might have to find some place to put these beautiful castings before we collect more of them. I don't know, I've got a little bit of room here. I think I'll just continue. So I just started chipping away at this next section of compressed materials down here at the bottom, and it seems like this is where, let's grab a little bit of it and take a look. See, this is where there seems to be good numbers of worms hanging out as I start to break this stuff up. I don't know how they get into this stuff. It's so dense and hard. But I'm going to go ahead at this point and just sort of go right for the remaining bits of this container here. Let's spin it around. I'm going to try to get a better view of what's happening here. I'm really curious to see what's accumulated at the bottom since we've been driving worms down to it. And at some point I was thinking it would be nice to have this all of this material nice and flaky and flowing. So I think now would be the time at this point to kind of break all of it apart into nice flowing, smooth flowing castings only. This is like a peach pit or something pretty big. And then the worms will do what they do. They'll dive down into it, and then we'll continue with the traditional light separation, but we won't have to worry about large chunks of stuff anymore. So it feels like we're getting pretty close to the finish line at this point. More pits. Lots of these big hard items that'll take like forever to break down. So we'll just break all this stuff up, leave this stuff out in the light so the worms can drive down into it, and then we'll be able to skim off the castings. Alright, I think we're going to do a little bit of a leapfrog here. I've got one of my trays, and what I've decided was I'm going to empty the red bucket to make it lighter, to let sifting continue. And you know, the bucket's just becoming a little bit too heavy and full. So I thought that if we were to transfer what remains to be separated into this tray here, it'll be a much more manageable environment to do this in, and then we'll have a nice container to drop all those sifted castings down into. And now we can empty the, let's get rid of this thing too. Put our little collection of scraps together that we filtered out, but I think what happens next is pouring out these beautiful castings into this bucket here, into this bag here, and hopefully we won't see too many worms. I did my best to exclude as many of them as I could. So this stuff all went right through the screen, so the fact that you're seeing it kind of clumping together here is just kind of its nature, I guess. That's the way castings usually are, right? You can kind of clump them together into one of these little balls, and then they should break apart really readily at any given time. So that's usually a good measure of some really nice castings materials. Now I've got a nice lightened screen. So now we can move these aside, and return our screening mechanism to service. But I think we're going to have to wait a minute before we can continue screening here. We're going to have to give these little guys a little bit of time to dive down into the material. So this is kind of the way I'll usually set things up when I'm doing a light separation in a tray like this. And I think we'll lift up here. Oh man, look at these gloves. So we'll use this section right here beneath the screen as our section where we're going to skim off the evacuated castings and scoop them up to be screened. And we'll just put all the stuff that's to be processed into a big pile over here. And once all these worms have cruised down into the material, we could begin with the skimming off of the material and screening of everything. Curious to see how many worms actually occupied this bag. So let's give them a little time to settle down into their pile of material here. And we could take some material off the top in a few minutes. Right here, this envelope, this is where I left the black soldier-fly larvae that we found earlier. And, well, where did he go? Interesting. Well, just so happens that the bag that the worms and the compost were in was right below. And it looks like our little friend has actually dropped down into the bag. You see him down there? Alright, well, he's in as good a place as any. Didn't seem like he was moving, but I guess he is. I just wanted to continue here. So I guess we'll reopen our little worm cubby hole that we could place more worms into as we encounter them. I was thinking we would try to excavate the edges all the way around. Both sides. Oh, there's a bunch of worms in here already. Okay, maybe not too much. Maybe that's not a good place to excavate, but then this front edge too, I wanted to break all this free as well. Okay. And then see how many worms we brought along for the ride. I don't want to subject them to the next step if I don't have to, which is to kind of wring this material together a little bit to break all these little boulders apart into a nice fine material. But I don't think I've seen any other worms in here, have you? Yeah, it's funny when you watch the video later and you realize that there was a worm right there under your fingers. Get this stuff here screened off. Oops. Making a big mess. Maybe not as big as a mess as I thought I would. I thought this would be a little bit messier, but it's coming together pretty nicely and orderly. And the material did actually dry out to this really nice consistency at this point, through and through. Even though there was so much of it, I thought it would take a while. And I mean, yeah, it's been a month and a half, so it kind of makes sense. I'll do another skim here. I got a feeling that we're starting to really approach the worm pile at this point. I'm not sure how much more stuff really covers these guys anymore. I'll just take a little bit off here really quick. I got to make a quick run out to my sister's place. So that'll give these little guys a chance to dive down into the material. When I come back, I can continue. But I've been at this for a while now. But there's really not much left to go here. But I do need to run this quick errand, and I'll take care of that. But I think pretty soon we're going to be down to the bottom. We're going to have ourselves a little bit of a worm pile here. I wonder how many we're going to have. Whoa, okay. Maybe I've got to offload some of these collected bits. All right, break time. I tell you, it's collecting up pretty nice, but I don't think we've got much more to gather here. I think the majority of what remains over in this pile is probably, for the most part, worms at this point. I guess we'll do another attempt at skimming off some of this material. Hopefully in the end leaving behind only a pile of worms. Every time I hit one of these pits, I always pull it out. Cherry pits. I have actually found quite a number of them. Alright. So maybe I can skim a little bit more off here, but I think we're going to have to give this pile a little bit more time again. Let these little guys retreat further down. And I wonder how many worms we've got hiding in this thing. I wonder how much more castings material we need to peel back before we are left with nothing but worms. I'm in no real rush at this point. I've got no problem just sifting a couple handfuls here, letting this process continue. I'll leave these lights on to try to help, convince the worms to dive down into the material. And I can come back in a little while and take off a little bit more. I don't want this to last all night though, so I'm not sure if I might just accept a certain amount of castings going along with the worms as acceptable. It doesn't have to be 100% perfect worms only. Let's get this next little amount skimmed through. Make sure we return any worms that came along for the ride. Come on, guys. Down into the middle of the pile. Do we have any more stuff we can kind of sneak out of here? It seems like we might be able to. What do we got left here? One or two more little handfuls. I guess one or two worms came along for the ride. We got them back into the collection. Alright. Let's get the last of this stuff out of here. Okay. Just give these guys a little bit more time to dive down, and we'll come back and we'll do another skim off the top. So I've got this little plastic container here. I thought I would use this to haul the worms out, transport them out of this little pile that they're in now, and release them into their new home. So we can weigh them. This thing comes up as, that must be kilogram, that'll be 1 ounce. 0.02 under the kilogram setting, and 1/2 ounce under the pound setting. Okay, let's go get those worms out of there and see how many we got. My hope is that I can sort of scoop up this pile and that the worms will, in a way, separate from the castings around them. It does feel like there is kind of a worm pile here. Okay, that was what I was after right there. Just sort of shake off their castings quick and dirty. And then maybe can do the same, a couple quick little piles. I guess what's over here is not much. Doesn't seem like they went all the way to the bottom, but there's a few worms in here too. Otherwise, yeah, we got a good number of them out of here. All right. Here too, if we can sort of shake the castings loose of them. Not sure how many we've got here. Be nice to think we've got a few hundred. Be kind of cool to see a similar result in the other two systems, but I got to come up with a process that's easier and quicker. Perhaps it doesn't have to be as thorough or whatever the case may be, but I do want to get these little guys working down here in my wormery, and then once it seems nice enough to get them back outside, I'll be able to let them resume work on my outdoor compost barrel, which is where they came from, and that's where they belong as far as I'm concerned. My only hope is that we're not introducing any weird creatures into my wormery down here. I'm definitely going back into the paper bag, that's for sure. But yeah, that's the trick, right? I gotta go get another paper bag, because those nice filtered castings that are in the grow bag now, that'll go into one paper bag, the one that it was in. But I'll need another paper bag for the bin that they're going to be released into. It's funny. All right, let's go bringing them over. I know we got some castings here, but it doesn't seem like it's a large quantity of castings relative to the worms. It's for the most part worms, I would say. Maybe we, deduct a couple ounces for what might be castings. Otherwise, it's all worms. It doesn't seem too heavy. It'll be interesting to see on the scale how much it registers as. Do we have everybody? I think we do. Oh, I saw one right here. Oh, another one right there. We can come back in here and pick off any stragglers, but I think for the most part we've gotten everybody. Sure looks that way, doesn't it? Let's go over to the scale. Alright, onto the scale with you guys. What do we got? It was what? 0.02 when we started, so it's 0.12. I don't know what that is. 12 grams or 120 grams or something? I don't know. As far as ounces goes, it was a half of an ounce, just the plastic tray itself, so we have to deduct a half of an ounce from 5 ounces. 4.5 ounces. And then we got to deduct a little bit for the castings themselves, right? So we got a 1/4 pound of worms here. Not bad. A lot of people would equate 1,000 worms to 1 pound. That means maybe we got 200-300 worms in here, if we're lucky. All right, let's get them situated in their new home. And so the tray that we used for this, as well as the sifting bucket, hardly show any signs of use. It was fairly dry, this stuff, so it didn't stick or leave any stains or anything like that. The bag is where we're going to, I guess, put the filtered, screened compost into. I guess same goes with the stuff that filtered out. I'll have to just put that in there with that, and then we'll bag it all up, keep it all isolated, and the only thing remaining is the worms. So let's get these little guys over onto the bench. What we've got going on for them is a nice new container. This container was built just a couple days ago. It's all set. All we gotta do is add the worms. So let's not wait. Let's move these little guys aside. We'll take off all these top coverings. I did my best to dampen everything in here quite thoroughly. I also pre-fed this one with pumpkin and coffee. So hopefully these guys are going to appreciate a nice fresh meal. These guys probably haven't seen fresh food in a while, living down at the bottom of my compost barrel and then living in these bags for the past 44 days. Alright, so if you got an idea of how many worms we're releasing into the system here, I'd love to hear everyone's thoughts. So let's let them get cozy in their new home. Yeah, we got quite a few worms here in this pile. Alright, let's spread them out so they've all got equal access to the material below them, and then they can make themselves at home. I believe we've given these little guys adequate time to get situated in their new home. So as we do with new bins, we're going to be given this little guy a label here too. It's a little different. It does say that it's compost barrel, and it's bag number 1 from the compost barrel. I'm not treating these as part of my wormery per se. I'm just treating them as guests, and I would like to see them back out in my compost barrel at some point in the near future. So they're here just on a temporary stay. How does that sound? Alright everyone, hopefully you enjoyed the video. If you did, as always, please don't forget to leave me a quick thumbs up before you go. That's always really appreciated. And if you haven't done so already, please also consider subscribing to the channel too. That's really appreciated as well. Alright everyone, have a great day. Thanks for watching.